Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Steelers Draft Talk. I'm your host, Steelers DB. With me is my good buddy, Nick Martin. Today, we got a really fun episode. We're going to be breaking down our top 5 wide receivers in the 2023 NFL Draft class. Really excited to get to this group. This is a group that we've been saving kind of till close to the draft for various different reasons. But first off, Nick, how we doing, brother?
Oh, I'm doing good, man. I'm putting the finishing touches all over my scouting reports and putting my big board together, and that should release soon on the site. I'm hoping to get it out by this weekend, and I really want everyone to check it out because there's a lot of great stuff. I've been working pretty hard on it.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I'm excited about that, brother. It's gonna be awesome content. I know people on the site gonna love that stuff. We also appreciate all the support for the recent episodes, especially y'all been blowing the Steelers draft talk stuff up. So just make sure you like the video, give us a comment, let us know what you think of the content. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/all Steelers talk. Without further ado, let's get going. I want to start with number 5, but I wanted to make sure that you didn't have any honorable mentions that you wanted to go over and kind of throw out some love to some of these guys. But before we do that, I do want to get your thoughts just generally on the class, kind of like we've been doing for every position.
Mhm.
My thoughts on this receiver class, I tweeted this out a couple of months ago, and it felt controversial maybe to some at the time. But I just don't think this receiver class is that good. Maybe that's just me being really spoiled from the past couple that we've had. Usually the receiver classes are just so loaded here in the past 4 or 5 years, 7-on-7, the way college offenses are. We usually have a plethora of top end talent. And I just don't see, there's guys that I like that we're going to really talk about. But I don't see a lot of elite, wide receiver 1 type potential guys. I would really be surprised if we got more than 1, maybe 2 of those guys in this class. But I see a lot of wide receiver 3s, a lot of wide receiver 4s, complementary pieces that are still very necessary in every team's offense, and I think are going to find themselves very useful at the next level. I just think that in terms of at the top, it's definitely a step down from where we've had in recent years. I was curious on kind of your thoughts on that as well.
I think this class reminds me a lot of the 2018 class, which I only gave out one first round grade that year, and it was to DJ Moore, who honestly, he was the only one who showed that next level ability in terms of being able to be a number 1 receiver. And even though I did like Calvin Ridley's game and Courtland Sutton's game, I just felt that there were too many inconsistencies overall in their games that I could not put first round grades on them. And I think a lot of this class is similar, but I do think there is a little bit more in the tier 3 to offer, guys like A.T. Perry or Jaden Reed. Those are very interesting receivers that you can definitely talk yourself into. Apologies about my voice. I blew it out the other day, and that's unfortunate, but we're gonna get through this, man.
No, you're good. You sound fine, but no, I think I definitely agree with what you're saying, man. There's a lot of guys that I would particularly be willing to invest in that 3rd or 4th round range. It's just I think expectations really need to be tempered with this class. That's just kind of my opinion on it. But
I think part of it with this class is we expected growth from guys like Jordan Addison
mhm,
and Kayshon Boutte, and we just didn't get that level of growth from the top level prospects.
yeah,
So it's viewed
Smith
as
and Jigba missed
very
all season.
yes,
Um,
exactly. It's one of those classes where we watched in the preseason, it looked good on paper, but we can't always account for development and off the field circumstances.
yep, like we say all the time, man, development's not linear. So, without further ado, you got anybody outside your top 5 that you want to shout out, or you want to go ahead and give us your number 5 receiver?
Cedric Tillman and A.T. Perry are probably the best X type receivers out in terms of archetype outside my top 5 because Tillman offers a lot in terms of his ability to make above the rim catches. He's just very good in contested situations, has an underrated release package that really shows itself in 21 film as opposed to the 22 film where he was dealing with injuries all year and just wasn't himself. That's where we saw Jalen Hyatt kind of overtake him. But I personally think Tillman is the better player. A.T. Perry shows a lot in terms of his release package and can get open vertically, but he had a few too many bad drops on film, especially with his hands technique. It's a little bit inconsistent overall, so I had a little bit more reservations on him. But they're they're good tier 3 players, guys that I think that can contribute down the line. I wouldn't put them in my top 5, but I understand why others would.
Yeah. And I'll give a quick shout out just to, I mean, this class is like absolutely loaded with slot players. There is a lot more value, a lot more depth, I think, at the slot position rather than like at the X or the Z out on the boundary. And when I look at a guy that I particularly see like a really easy projection for, is a guy like Josh Downs from North Carolina. He wasn't in my top 5, but I do see it with him. And Downs to me is best described as a problem solver. He's a shifty route runner, a guy who can create separation, particularly underneath. This dude destroyed people on whip routes. I mean, I watched this dude give so many guys problems just being able to sink his hips, get out of his breaks with explosiveness. Awesome hands. His hands really improved. He dropped his drop rate drastically this past season. He is one of those guys that's only about 5'9". I don't know what he weighed in. I think it was like 170, 175. He was small, but plays above the rim. And I love that about him. He attacks the ball at its highest point. I think he plays extremely well through contact. This dude's just a baller, man. Like, he's a problem solver. The one thing about Downs that I think is going to be a little bit interesting in terms of his next projection, he does a good job reading zone coverage and staying on track there, finding open voids in the zone. He is a little bit of a freestyler, though. Like I think I've said this to
And one
multiple
mixtape.
people. Yeah, he's the N1 mixtape route runner of this class. Like there are times where he's doing stuff like spin moves 20 yards down the field, and I'm just like, what are we doing? Like, so I think timing based offenses are going to want to see him, kind of rein some of that stuff in. But I do think he's like a little bit of a problem solver because like he can get open. So, and I think his hands drastically improved, the drops decreased. So he was just outside of my top 5. I think if you're getting a guy like Josh Downs, in the middle of day 2 or, somewhere around the second round, mid to late second round range, I think you feel pretty good about it because I think he's a wide receiver 3 at the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And he can do that fairly early in his career. So, you want to go first on number 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for number 5, I had Marvin Mims from Oklahoma. He is one of the youngest receivers in this class, and he probably has among the most potential as a vertical threat, even including guys like Jalen Hyatt, because Mims, he has an instant acceleration gear that he can just tap into in his routes. Something that I think is really hard to see because of how Oklahoma used him. They protected him a lot with the scheme in terms of, putting him in the slot, putting him in motion consistently. A lot of times he would get the ball and like he didn't get the ball as much as he should have this past season because you see a lot of like high yards per reception, like over 20 yards per reception, which is absurd with Marvin Mims. That's because he only had like about 50 or so catches and he still converted it into 1,000 yards. The thing about Mims that is so impressive to me is his ability above the rim. In terms of just being able to make plays back shoulder or just make those contested catches, he has such good hands technique in terms of being able to keep his hands uniform and keep them close together, create a nice diamond. Like he's extremely sure-handed when it comes to making those plays and just playing taller than he's listed. Like he's an explosive leaper. He can get over guys. His release package, he shows a good bit in terms of his deception, but the problem is when he gets to his secondary release, a lot of times when guys are playing catch technique on him, he didn't really seem to have much of an answer, and he kind of had lost his speed as guys got hands on him, and he could get rerouted a little bit more easily. You want to see him improve that secondary release in terms of his hand usage because he shows the deception. He just has to get more of his hands hand usage down and a little bit more comfortable. But running this dude on slot fades or, running him out wide as a vertical threat and maybe just, keeping his routes kind of simple in terms of hitches, and just verticals and stopping routes early on in his career. I think you can really work with a guy like that, especially if you're a team like the Chargers who have a quarterback who really needs a vertical threat. Like, he's going to dictate safety help when that's the type of gear he has.
Yeah, I like Marvin Mims as well. He wasn't in my top five, but I know we've talked a lot off the pod about how the lack of buzz around a guy like Mims, who's been productive really since he stepped on foot at campus. That's been surprising to me. He's still a relatively young wide receiver. Like you said, the above the rim ability, some of the spectacular catches he's made over the course of his career has been awesome to see. And I would even argue, like you said, that he didn't get the ball as much as he should have this past season. I think that was the case, like, throughout his Oklahoma career. Like,
Yes.
if you really look, but even back when they had, Caleb Williams, Spencer Rattler, there was a lot of times where, they were rotating other receivers in, but there was times where I felt like on film, like he was wide open and wasn't getting the looks or the targets. And maybe we're having a different conversation around his buzz if those had, kind of came to fruition. But I like Mims a lot. He has a basketball background. That's kind of where some of that leaping ability and contested catch ability kind of comes from. I got to speak with him a good amount at the combine. He was a really nice dude. I'm rooting for him for sure. So, getting into my number 5 receiver is actually Cedric Tillman, who you already talked a little bit about. I'm really high on Tillman, man. I think that he is a really good player, 6'3", 215 pounds. He has the throwback prototype X receiver type of build on the boundary. Tillman's got exceptional hands. Love the body control along the sideline, the ability to just contort his body and make difficult catches outside of his frame. Defenders rarely seem to bother him at the catch point. Guys draped all over him, he would still make the play. I think we've talked a little bit about this too, but like building your receiver room, kind of like a basketball team, like Tillman's that throwback, like power post up power forward. That's just
Yes.
going to use his size and kind of body smaller corners up. He's a long strider with build up speed, a little bit of suddenness to his game, especially as a route runner. I really liked the 10-yard split that he ran at the combine. I think it was like 1.52, which even surprised me a little bit. Tillman's physicality can be, like I said, difficult for those smaller slider corners to match up with. And I just agree with what you said. Like, if you put on the 2021 tape, he's just a different player. You could tell that he was not 100% when he came back this year. At the combine, he stated that, he wasn't 100% up until January. So, like, he didn't really get the chance to have the full training experience leading up to the combine. I think that if you go back to 2021, I know it took him a couple years. He got lost in the shuffle behind some other receivers like Josh Palmer, guys like that. But I'm still a believer that 2021 tape of Cedric Tillman, that player is still going to be there. And I think that he offers like unique upside because this class doesn't, like I said, this class is full of short slot receivers. And I just think that he's one of the very few like prototypical X receivers in the class, and that gives him, some added value. Just in terms of the negatives, I would personally like to see a more detailed release package at the line of scrimmage. I did feel like, on his 2022 tape, he would get caught kind of playing with corners a little bit too much at the line of scrimmage. It seemed like he would come off the ball without much of a game plan on how he was going to attack the corner's leverage or hands. I do think that I would like to also see him expand his route tree. That Tennessee offense is a very difficult projection. We've talked about that for all these guys that are coming out of that offense. Just not a very vast route tree, and the splits are different. Everything's going to change like at the next level. And I do think he takes some gather steps to get in and out of his breaks when he's running like hitches and hard stop routes and things like that. But overall, like Tillman, think he's a good X receiver. I would have no qualms about taking him top 50. I seem to be higher on him than the consensus. I've seen some other people, a couple, I think it was pre-combine, I tweeted out that I had a higher grade on him than I did Jalen Hyatt. And that's no disrespect to some of the things that Hyatt can do for you in terms of his vertical speed, dictate safety help. I just think as a complete wide receiver, Tillman's physicality, his catch radius, the body control is almost, to me, as good of a trump card as Hyatt's speed is. I really believe in his size and ability to play at that size at the next level and how it's going to translate. So he's going to be fascinating for me, like I said, because I'm higher on him than the consensus. I'm interested to see if I'm right about that. So Tillman's a good player, though. He was a really fun study. Let's get into who's your number 4 guy?
So, number 4 for me, speaking of X receiver archetypes, I had Quentin Johnston from TCU. This is a receiver I have such a love-hate relationship with because I love the ability to get off of press coverage. I think he is just very detailed in his release package. There's a lot of good to him in terms of tempo variation. He can also he can push a defender's cushion from off coverage. He shows good head fakes. Like he's just really deceptive. And it also just plays into his ability after the catch. The problem with him is he has a problem that I have seen with some bigger receivers before who don't play as big as they are or as long as they are. And it has to do ultimately with his catch technique. A lot of times his hands are not always uniform together, or he ends up playing with these really wide hands and he ends up clapping on the ball. And you see it a lot in these contested situations where he's like going up and he's almost letting it go into his body, not necessarily into his body. He's not catching it at the ball's highest point. And that's one of the weirdest things about him because he has some interesting ball tracking. Like there are instances when the ball is underthrown by almost 10 yards and he can come back to it and somehow find the ball in the air. And it's just incredible the type of play he can make. But then when he has a situation where, or the quarterback's throwing a jump ball to him, he's like almost barely getting off the ground. He's timing his jump too early. So then he ends up, attacking the ball lower than he should. And, you know, the big thing with me, I want to see improvement in that regard. And he was still struggling with drops even at his pro day. And I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert. I don't because there's a lot of things I'm still learning, but I've listened to, a few things. I've read a few things on what his receiving coach is trying to teach him in the off season. And I just don't think he's getting the proper advice because I don't think he's being critiqued enough on those plays where he did not have optimal hands positioning. It's a problem that's going to affect him, but unlike receivers like Chase Claypool that it's plagued, he has a very detailed release package. He can get open, especially in the short and intermediate range. You just might have to live with those drops and hope that they don't become a chronic issue because the contested situations it's going to be frustrating. He's not going to be able to capitalize on that length.
Yeah. So Johnson is actually my number 3 wide receiver on this list. So I'll go ahead and kind of talk about him. But almost 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", 210 pounds. He's a height, weight, speed demon. Big play potential whenever he touches the ball. Some of the things I like about Johnson, it's almost instantaneous from his transition from receiver to runner. Excuse me.
Yes.
Quick, sudden plants of his feet, instant burst upfield. It also shows up, his stop and start ability when he gets in and out of his breaks. I thought that was really impressive for his size. He has the ability to stack cornerbacks, defenders down the sideline. I think he would have had even more explosive plays in that area of the field if the quarterback accuracy was a little bit better in his direction at times. There are nice examples of ball tracking that you like to see. I think back to the Kansas game when they threw him that a deep ball in the very back of the end zone, and he was able to kind of catch it over his shoulder and get 2 feet in bounds. There are examples of that over his tape. And I think in general, he does find the ball when it's in the air. It's what happens after that kind of is problematic. But he basically has a small receiver skill set and a big receiver frame with all the necessary tools that you would want for a developmental player. So that's where I think the upside comes in for me, and stacking him 3 or 4 kind of came at that juncture because I was trying to figure out what am I going to take, the better player who I think is easier to translate now, or the higher potential guy. Um, I just think that he plays like he's 5'10" sometimes. And I think that his really impressive leaping ability, like I've seen this dude make catches on the sidelines out of bounds where it literally looks like he jumps like 50 inches in the air. I mean, it's incredible. Like his wingspan and his height and vertical combined should make him this dominant force in jump ball situations, but he just doesn't attack the ball at the apex. Like he constantly will leap up in the air and then still try to body catch it or cradle it. And that's just problematic because it gives those smaller cornerbacks a chance to get their hands in there to rake the ball out, or you're basically, becoming shorter just by the way you're attacking the ball. So some of that size and athleticism kind of just doesn't really matter as much. I would just like to see him play bigger. I want to see him play like a 6'3" guy, and it just doesn't happen enough. And then just the only other thing, I do think the release package is more detailed than people are giving it credit for. He really has a habit of, this is something that I caught on to kind of 3 or 4 games into his tape. He has a habit of coming off the ball against off coverage and then standing real tall before he breaks down. And that's really problematic because when you have cornerbacks, especially at the next level, it doesn't matter how good you can get in and out of your breaks. If they see your weight start to rise like that and your strides start to get really long and then get really choppy, they're going to jump those routes. And your quarterback's going to be pissed off because you're getting pick sixed.
Hmm.
So he's got to work on not telegraphing some of his routes. But overall, Johnston, I think he is a boomer bust guy. I don't like calling players that too often, but I think the range of outcomes for a player like Johnston is going to be pretty wide. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I've seen some interesting comps anywhere from like Kevin White to Brandon Ayuk to like
All over the
um
place.
yeah, I kind of went with a little bit. He plays almost like Dwayne Bowe, but he doesn't have like quite the hands
Hmm.
and like that contested ability that Dwayne Bowe had, which is a little frustrating, trying to come up for a medium-sized comp for him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a difficult player. I don't have a comp for him. He's a fascinating evaluation just because, like I said, he's a small receiver in a big receiver's body. That's the
Yep.
best way I can really describe him. So I'll kind of get into my number 4 player. My number 4 guys is Zay Flowers from Boston College. 5'9", 182 pounds, top tier production. He produced with uneven quarterback play at the college level. He had the chance to leave Boston College, go elsewhere, take advantage of NIL. He stayed there, stayed put. Quarterback injuries and stuff kind of limited some of his production at times, but he produced regardless. He's a dynamic playmaker who has a penchant for making guys miss and creating explosive plays after the catch. This dude is really freaking slippery. His burst, stop, and start ability, very good. He can get to the third gear in a hurry. Flowers, the best way I can describe him as a route runner is all gas, no brakes. Like he is full throttle all the time and can get to that third gear just almost instantaneously. Impressive amount of wiggle to his game. He destroys pursuit angles, makes guys miss at the point of contact. Just again, just incredibly slippery in the open field. You get this dude the ball in his hands, and he's going to do some damage for you. He did a lot of his work in the deep area of the field. They used him as a deep threat over the course of his career. He was frequently, turning safeties around, leaving them in the dust if he was given the chance. He loses very little speed in and out of his breaks, which enables him to create even more separation as a route runner. Just some of the negatives for Flowers. He's small. I do like that he was able to put on, he put on about 13 pounds from the Shrine Bowl to the Combine and was still able to run a 4.4. So that to me is a good sign. Drops have been a problem at times. At times, he can be a little bit of a body catcher over the middle of the field. Needs to incorporate some pace and tempo manipulation to his game.
Yes,
So
I
he
agree.
is all gas, no brakes, but there's no nuance to his route running. He is going to run as fast as he can to point A, and then he's going to run as fast as he can to point B. And that's fine at the college level because, like, he's obviously been a better athlete than pretty much everybody in the ACC especially playing at 170 because he was just so fast, legitimate sub 4.4 speed at that weight. But that's going to be a little more difficult to just win off pure athleticism at the next level. He needs to get more detailed in that regard. Obviously, the frame and catch radius concerns could limit some of his upside in terms of what he could potentially be. I like that he has inside-outside versatility. A lot of his snaps in college have came from the outside. I anticipate that he's going to get the chance to move outside at the next level. I just think, he's small and he doesn't have the biggest catch radius. So if that's something you really want in your outside receivers, he's not going to be able to offer you that. But Flowers is a good player. Like I said, going back and forth between him and Johnston was really like, I see more potential in Johnston just because of his athletic gifts, some of the things that you can't teach with his size and athleticism. But Flowers is a really good player. I think traditionally he probably is a guy that you would absolutely be enamored with in the second round, but in this class without other really top tier playmakers,
Got
and we know,
invited to the draft.
yeah, and we know how desperate these guys are to get playmakers on the field, and I think Flowers is going to end up going round one, which I personally didn't give him a round one grade, but I do think he's going to be a very, very good wide receiver 3. And potentially even like wide receiver 2 at the next level, depending on the situation that he goes to.
So Zay Flowers is my number 3 receiver. I had a very interesting experience overall watching Flowers film, mainly because finding film for this past year was ridiculously difficult. But also, we talked about this quarterback play. I've watched a lot of Phil Dracovic in the past, and I don't know why I've done that to myself, but the thing with Zay Flowers is you mentioned it. He's always all gas, no brakes. I like that to a degree because you keep your routes on time, allow your quarterback to be able to find you consistently. He needs to add that route tempo variation. I agree. It would keep corners much more on their heels against him for sure. Biggest thing with me, what I liked about Zay Flowers was actually off the field. I think he is an incredible worker. We could talk about the 13-pound gain in terms of pure muscle that he was able to do, but he's been working with some really good receiver influences from a pure on-field perspective. Guys like Antonio Brown took him under his wing. He's learning a lot from them. You can see him implementing certain aspects of his game, especially in terms of his ability after the catch. The problem I have with Zay Flowers is I think he has a little bit of a DAndre Johnson syndrome of he has the right hands positioning, he can track the ball well, but there are concentration drops in terms of, just in really weird situations, like he'll hit him right in the hands or he'll have it like perfectly in and he just won't see it in and he just ends up dropping it. He's going to have to learn, how to keep his concentration a little bit better in those situations, because I think with him, unlike Quentin Johnston, it's a technique. It's not a technique thing. It is an eye discipline thing, and I think with his upside in terms of his character, work ethic, I thought he was way better at destroying press than I would honestly give him credit for. He keeps, like I said, we both said, he plays very fast with his releases. He has a good release package. He's just not very good at mixing his tempo, which if you can teach that a little bit more, I think there's a little bit of untapped upside with him overall. I just think it's really hard for me to get on page with the high end comps that I've seen from him, like Antonio Brown. Like I just can't do it. It's not something I can willingly do. I like Zay Flowers as a vertical threat. I think he runs a lot of really good routes. I think he runs a lot of the more difficult ones, and he's good in the middle of the field. He tracks the ball extremely well over his shoulder. There was a play in the middle of the field where he has 2 defenders around him, and the quarterback for some reason thought, I'm going to throw this to him, and he goes right over the safety in front of him and just plucks it over him. And that's just an impressive ability of what Zay Flowers could be at the next level. Overall, he reminded me a lot of T.Y. Hilton who was a really solid receiver in his time in
That's a good
Indianapolis.
comp.
I think he can. I think you would be. I think a lot of teams would think about plugging him into the slot, but I think he's a Z receiver who I want in motion. I don't want him tied to the line of scrimmage. I want to move him around and keep defenses honest because I believe he can be a solid number 2 receiver in the league. I think there's really good floor with Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that comp. And when Zay too, like he was a guy that I thought was going to come out last year. Like I really was surprised that he went back to school. Like he's been on like the draft Twitter radar for a really long time. So really like Zay. I'll get to my number 2 wide receiver. My number 2 wide receiver is Jackson Smith-Njigba. So this was kind of tough distinguishing number 1 and 2, and I'll kind of get into the reasons why I shaped it out the way I did. But Smith-Njigba, 6'1", like 200-ish pounds, monster year in the slot, even playing next to lottery picks like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave back in 2021. Very detailed route runner who sets up defenders with pace and manipulation, attacks leverage very well. The old cliche of like quarterback's best friend, that was something that I put in his scouting report. I think it definitely applies to JSN. He quickly uncovers underneath in the short and intermediate areas of the field, and albeit on a small sample size, he caught all 7 of his contested catch targets back in 2021. Smith-Njigba isn't a burner, but the way that he creates explosive plays is after the catch prowess. I think he's got extremely good vision as a ball carrier. He sets up defenders. He makes so many guys miss and runs through arm tackles. That was something that when I went back and watched his film from 2021, I don't think I appreciated enough just how many big plays he sprung, even though he didn't necessarily, always had, like, he wasn't outrunning guys. Like, guys were catching him from behind, but, like, he had a good ability, like, as soon as he caught the ball, quickly transition to a runner, getting his eyes up the field, knowing how to set defenders up, and things like that. So really like that aspect of his game. As far as Smith-Njigba's negatives, he's pretty much only exclusively played in the slot. So his outside ability is really just, there's not any tape really to go off of, just a select number of snaps. I don't particularly think that 4 or 5 speed of his translate or shows up on tape as much. I view him as more of like a 4.5, 4.6 guy, which isn't a problem for me at all, obviously, because he's my number 2 wide receiver. But I do think it's a problem if you're going to be asking him to play a ton outside. And the reason why is, like, when you're in the NFL and you can't consistently threaten the ability to run by defenders, even if you play with good pace and manipulation, even if you're a good route runner, if they don't fear you running by them, they are going to literally just sit on all your breaks. And I just think that I don't know if Smith-Njigba is that type of player to be able to overcompensate for that. He's only got 1 year of production. He's an underclassman, missed 2022 with, I think it was a soft tissue, like hamstring, maybe. I could be wrong on that.
It was hamstring.
So Smith-Njigba, again, he to me is, I know people have, like, I guess I've tried to use this phrase like a lot on here talking about prospects because I feel like the meaning of it kind of gets lost, but it's evaluation versus valuation. Smith-Njigba to me is a very easy evaluation. I think he is a starting high quality slot receiver at the next level. Can probably develop into like a number 2 option in a good offense. He is going to be really tough over the middle of the field. He's going to uncover quickly underneath, gives you some yards after the catch ability. I don't know that he's ever going to be this dominant number 1 wide receiver. Now, we have seen guys play exclusively really in the slot and still become number 1 wide receivers, like Cooper Kupp. I've seen like people say that maybe he's Cooper Kupp. I don't personally see that. I know Cooper Kupp like drastically outplayed his draft slot. Maybe Smith-Njigba does the same. But I think that, Smith-Njigba to me is going to be a good player at the next level. I don't know what the ceiling is because, again, regardless of what he tested out at his pro day, and we've got to add a little bit to that considering it was a pro day time, I think there are some athletic limitations to him despite him being a really, really good receiver. So
I think you had some really interesting points overall. So, thing I want to get out of the way, Jackson Smith-Njigba is actually my number 1 receiver, but I want to go ahead and add a few things. You mentioned his 40 time 4.52. Something I found really strange was his 10 split was a 1.65, which is like 20th percentile or something
Hmm.
like that, and that just does not align with a 4.52 overall. So I have a few theories. He has issues building up to his full speed and needs more of a runway, which is why he might be more limited to the slot. The thing or that speed just isn't really a pure indicator of how he plays on film, which I can kind of agree with. Honestly, the reason I use the Cooper Cup comparison is I just think they are very nuanced players in terms of being able to attack both man and zone. Something I appreciated more when I was watching CJ Stroud's 21 film was just how many times this dude was making himself available in those off script situations, in those situations where he had to deceive zone leverage and create openings. Just there were many instances where Stroud is just relying on this receiver, and that's something I think is people don't like look at enough. Marvin Harrison Jr. may be the most talented receiver on that team. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the most reliable. And sometimes that reliability can become such a huge asset as a receiver that you become the number one on your team because you're so trusted to be in the right spot, to be able to get open. And while that may only happen in the slot, we've seen more and more how many receivers are becoming their go-to target on their teams. Monroe St. Brown, Cooper Cup. There are number one receivers that play in the slot, and I don't think there's anything wrong with Jackson Smith-Njigba being a number one that plays in the slot.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, he's a good player, man. Like I know there might be some people that knock him because of the athletic testing, but I think of like what he can already do for an offense. I do value that fairly high. So I'll kind of get into my number one player. I'm assuming he's probably number two for you.
He is.
All right. My number one receiver is still Jordan Addison. I mean, this was kind of tough because I kind of weighed back and forth on who I was going to put here between him and Smith-Njigba. But Addison is a really unique case study. So, he's 6 foot. He's only about 170 pounds. He didn't run very fast at the combine. I think he ran like a 4.59. His agility numbers weren't great at his pro day because it was like a freaking monsoon out there in USC the
Throw
day
those
that.
numbers out.
Yeah, I mean they're just not very important to me. I know that this dude's very agile. So Addison just didn't test very well, and I think that's going to turn a lot of people off. And it is an important part of this evaluation. But when I look at Addison, I see a 3-level route runner who is one of the most easy separators that you'll find in college football. I mean, this dude was consistently open, and that's something that I value a lot. And that's why I think that he's always been this high volume target, is because the dude is open all the time. When you go back to his junior season at Pitt, 1,500 receiving yards, like 17 touchdowns. This dude uncovers at all three levels of the field. He also wins all the time in the red zone. This dude, you get him matched up on the backside of like a 3-by-1. He'll win on whip routes. He wins on slants. He understands how to manipulate defenders' leverage, get their hips turned, and fly past them the other way. I do think that he has more than enough vertical speed. I said in my scouting report that I filed for the site back in like, I don't know, December, January, that I thought he was a 4.5 speed guy. I don't know why people are surprised that he ran a 4.5. But the thing is, he gets to that speed in a good time, and he understands how to set defenders up. So like he's constantly playing like a step ahead. I just think that the productivity that we saw from him, when I look at the differences between his junior and senior, or excuse me, his sophomore and junior tape with Pitt and USC. Pitt, he was more dynamic after the catch. He played through contact well at the catch point. He, was just a more featured part of the offense. I mean, he played more in the slot at Pitt. When I look at his junior tape, he got the experience of playing outside. He faced more press coverage. I saw noticeable improvements with his release package, dealing with physicality and press, and that linked from some of those bigger corners in the Pac-12. But He wasn't as great after the catch. He dealt with some injuries again, um, but the drops went away. Like, and I do think that he is a natural catcher of the football.
Yes.
Like when he goes over the middle of the field, even with his frame, he will extend outside of his frame. You'll see the diamond, reels catches in like that. So there's a lot to like. And I think if you can combine the best parts, and maybe this is a bad way of thinking of it, but I think if you combine the best parts of what he did at Pitt his sophomore year, the best parts of what we saw at USC last year when he was healthy, you combine that into one player, I think that you had the best receiver prospect in this particular class. Now, do I think Addison would have been a top 3, 4, maybe even 5 guy last year? No, I don't. I mean, I don't think he's that level of player. I don't give very many comps. As you guys know, I'm usually good for about one comp per positional ranking video that we've done throughout this cycle. But Jordan Addison is Calvin Ridley to me. That's what I see. I see a very detailed route runner who creates easy separation. I also think that the Calvin Ridley upside or potential is there for Addison. I think he can be that number one wide receiver. Maybe not like top 10 wide receiver in the league, top 15, but I do think that he can be that mid to low end wide receiver one at the next level who gives you inside outside versatility.
So for me, in terms of his press releases, I thought there was some improvement on the USC film, but I didn't think it was enough to dissuade my concerns versus press overall. A lot of it has to do with his hand usage off the line and his placement. A lot of times he shows this release package. He can show these moves to get off the line, but he lets guys get into his chest too much and it lets him get rerouted a little too often. You saw it against Caillou Blue Kelly, Rajon Wright of Oregon State. Now, while Addison absolutely cooked Stanford, he did not cook Caillou Blue Kelly every single play, And in terms of his best stuff, I thought it just came from the slot. Like he is one of the best in terms of being able to manipulate off coverage. If you play quarters versus him and you have your safety inside aligned to him, you are going to be panicking because he can sell slot fade, post corner, like he's so good at being able to get open vertically and he understands that aspect of his game. Something like I'm I try not to force comps, but he reminds me a lot of Pittsburgh Emmanuel Sanders, not the one that played for the Broncos, because you saw Sanders get a lot better versus press coverage over the point of his career. I think with Addison, you might see that over time. For now, I start him out in the slot, let him work at what he does best because you mentioned the hands in his positioning. Like he's really good at making those tough catches over the middle. Like he took some tough hits at Pitt that weren't really on display in the USC film as much. And he's just really good at being able to find the soft spots in zone. I think he's way better versus zone than he is man coverage overall. I think he's just really good at being able to deceive zone leverage and create those openings. So for me, Addison is somewhere between like a slot and a potential Z receiver down the line, which for me, I think that's he's behind Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think he could be one of the top end number twos on a team like an Emmanuel Sanders was back in his prime.
Yeah, I think that's the Amanda Sanders. That's probably a good comp as well.
Different testing
Addison.
though.
Yeah, different testing. I would say for Addison, just like the negatives, man. Like I said, the tapes in 2021 and 2022 are so very different, in my opinion. He looks like a different player. I know the offenses that they played in were so different as well. One of the concerns that I have, like, along with just playing better through like physicality, I thought that he showed flashes of that last season, but I still agree that he could get better playing through contact and physicality throughout his route. Um, I'm a little bit concerned about his frame, not in the
Yeah.
fact that like he's not going to be able to get open. I'm just concerned that he's going to have trouble staying healthy. I don't know. I don't recall him at Pitt missing too many games. This isn't something I had in my notes, but this is something that I've always thought about him. I don't know if he missed games at Pitt. I remember him being like banged up a time or two and then like getting back up and playing. But he missed, it felt like he was on the turf getting looked at several different times when I watched USC this
Yes.
past season.
Yeah.
And I know he did have like, I think it was a foot injury that knocked him out of that first Utah game, which he was cooking Utah in that game, by the way, up until he got, set out with an injury. But I do worry a little bit, like, is his frame going to be conducive to a long playing career, especially if he's playing in the slot, and he's taking those hits against safeties and linebackers? I don't have a problem with this dude like, there's no alligator arms over the middle of the field against zone coverage with him. It's just a matter of like, is his body going to hold up? So that would be one of my biggest concerns with him. And I think that that's valid. When you have a guy that's 170 pounds, like, you have to ask that question. That's why historically we do not see very many 170-pound receivers go in the first round. And if they do, they typically run like 4.3, or we
Or
just
they're
don't take them
Devontae
there anymore.
Smith.
Yeah.
Or they're Devontae Smith with that unreal body control.
So that's another comp that I just do not like whatsoever.
Nope. Don't
Devontae was so good about playing through physicality, so good in the air with his body control. The catch radius was better. I don't see that as the comp at all for him. Like I said, I see Calvin Ridley. I could get on board with Emmanuel Sanders as well as comps, but I don't think. I will admittedly say, like, I love Devontae Smith. Like, I want to say he was like my fifth. I think he was like my fifth ranked player that year. Like, I think that Smith is one of those players that, like, if you polled NFL Twitter, they would probably tell you, like, yeah, he's a good player. But, like, I think if he didn't play in Philly in a run-heavy offense next to A.J. Brown, we would be talking about Devontae Smith as a top 10 receiver in the league, because I think he's that good already. But you got anything else? You look like you did.
You cut out part like through your monologue, so that was unfortunate. But I mean, I just want to just add that Devontae Smith was a top 3 receiver in a deep class for a reason. Like, there were a lot of traits that were existent with him that aren't in Addison's game, and that's not a slight against Addison. It's just being real about the type of prospect that Addison currently is, which he's still a good prospect. He's still a guy who can produce in the right situation. I understand why a team might take him in the first round. I understand why a team might pass on him for the second round if he ends up falling. Like, it's a very delicate situation. He's a very polarizing player right now, but I definitely see a good player.
Yep, it's going to be interesting to see where he lands. I'm excited to see.
Chargers is my prediction.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a good one. I've kind of pegged the Vikings as like my favorite landing spot for him. So just because I think he'll destroy one-on-one coverage and all those cloud coverages that go Justin Jefferson's way. So
yeah.
Overall, appreciate you guys tuning into the episode. Hopefully you all like the content. Please make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment for us. Let us know what y'all think. Let us know what y'all thought of the episode so far throughout the cycle. Please make sure you subscribe at youtube.com/allsteelerstalk. Nick and I will be back maybe in a couple days. We'll drop another episode because we've got a couple more position groups and a potential mock draft that we're trying to get through before we get to next Thursday. So really excited about that. It's been a fun time talking ball with you guys. So you guys have a good rest of your day. Peace.